From KAMR Local 4 News, your local election headquarters, this is Politics Today.
Representative for District 88, Ken King, joined us in studio to talk about the data center boom here on the High Plains and the Lone Star State. Thanks for joining us here on Politics Today. I'm Jack Kessler. Our very own Andy Justice sat down with Representative King to learn more.
State Affairs Committee, one of our charges when the purview is over the power grid, and data centers are going to consume a lot of power. There's a lot of proposed new power trying to come onto the ERCOT grid, and it all legislative wise, as far as the House goes, it'll all land in State Affairs.
Do you think we're going to have a special session, or are we going to hold off until January? Because I know this is something that we're hearing Governor Abbott talk about. I know that you served on a panel not too long ago where this is what everybody's talking about, the data centers that continue to pop up here, not only just in West Texas and on the Golden spread, but all over the state.
Yeah, they're everywhere. West Texas, it seems to be ground zero for data centers right now. But to your question about a special session, I don't think so. You know, that's the way Texas works. That's up to the governor. But I'd be really, there's not much that surprises me in Austin these days, but I would be surprised if he called a special session.
So I think it's mid-January, you guys will head back to work, and I'm sure a lot of legislation is going to come through about AI data centers for most people, because it is something that we're hearing that's affecting everything that we do. A lot of news stories. We're seeing these people employ massive amounts of workers. What, for somebody who doesn't understand this drive, this boom here, explain how it all happened.
Well, so, you know, we use data centers all the time and our data, and currently data centers are really prolific in China. And if you've listened to President Trump talk about it, it is a national security issue. Do you want your data held in China, or do you want it held in Texas, where Texas has some say over how it's regulated and taken care of? The interesting thing about the data center boom is, you know, the national security piece of it is actually real. It's a big deal. We're not getting rid of AI. AI is here to stay. We've been using data centers for years, and as technology grows, the need for data centers continues to grow. I'm not saying I'm for them or against them. I'm just saying it's a reality. There's a lot of misinformation out about data centers right now. A lot of true information as well, but most of that information is being shared on Facebook and other social media platforms. The irony to me is the people that are hating the data centers are actually using a data center to hate the data center. You cannot get on Facebook without a data center. So I think people need to realize that this is the world we live in. Me personally, I'd love to throw my phone in the trash and go back to 1985.
You and me both.
I would love it, but that's not reality. That's not what we're going to do. But you know, as far as the data centers coming to our part of Texas, as we were discussing for the interview, these data center developers are hunting stranded power. There's a junction somewhere between a 345 kV line and ERCOT where the SPP grid, the federal grid, which is what Xcel Energy runs off of, and our co-ops get their power from outside of ERCOT. There's a juncture where there's stranded power. Anytime you see a data center going up, just look up. You're going to see a big power line, and somebody has identified stranded electricity that's just kind of evaporating into the atmosphere, because these things take a massive amount of electricity. The other thing that I think people are somewhat confused about, that most data centers, with the exception of two or three Google projects, these are real estate deals. It's just like Westgate Mall. Dillard's doesn't own the space in Westgate Mall. The developer built the building, made the space, Dillard's rents the space. These developers that are coming in my opinion, they're betting on the golden ticket. There's only so much room in the ERCOT grid for an interconnect, and some of these are proposed are, 2, 3, 4 gigawatts apiece. One of them right outside of town here is proposing 11 gigawatts of power just for them. There's not enough transmission for all of that to get built out. So these developers are building massive facilities right now and still don't know if they're going to get an interconnect or have the power to run these things. It's one of these, if you build it, they will come. So they're spending all this money building these huge facilities. And then the rulemaking that was put in place with a bill I carried in the House, it was called Senate Bill 6 last session. It directed PUC and ERCOT to set out rules, and they call the process batch. Well, batch 0, the first round of batch 0 came out this week, and it didn't approve anybody to get an interconnect for a data center. What it said was this group of people who have applied now made it to the July round. And then if they make it past the July round, the first few that come into existence will probably know at the end of August. And then sometime next year, batch 1 will start, and those kind of things. When we see all these data centers going up, there's going to be a lot of big old stranded barns around Texas because there's just not capacity for the 400 plus proposed gigawatts coming to Texas right now. The transmission doesn't exist.
But yet they're building.
They're building, and if they get the golden ticket from ERCOT, they will make billions of dollars renting space to the hyperscalers. And the hyperscalers are companies like OpenAI, Google, Meta, Tesla, people like that. And there's only a handful of customers to fill these spaces, but they are computing so much data so fast, and AI is growing at a rate that is just absolutely unbelievable, that every little kilowatt, megawatt, gigawatt of electricity that they can use to power these things, they will be. That's why the hyperscalers, when I talk to them and I ask them, like, okay, you got 10 data center developers out here, which one are you going to go to? Well, they don't have a contract with any of them. They're going with whoever gets the electricity. That's where they're headed.
They're not signing any deals until that golden ticket, as you said, comes down from ERCOT. Then they can plug into that power, and they're going.
That is 100% correct.
We have more from Representative King after the break. You're watching Politics Today.
Relatively cheap land. It's typically flat. And we're outside of ERCOT. So all of these data centers want to buy and sell back into the ERCOT market, which covers 75% of Texas, but we're not in ERCOT. So they have very little ERCOT oversight on their project once they get the interconnect. And then 2, if they're not hooking up into the SPP, Southwest Power Pool connection, they're not regulated by the feds. FERC doesn't regulate them. I think, from a business environment, this is the best place to do business. This is the best part of Texas to do business. There's very little. We have no non-attainment counties, so we're lightly regulated by the EPA out here. I think there's probably dozens of really good reasons why they would want to come to West Texas, but the number one thing is stranded power. All these hyperscalers and data center developers, Texas is potentially looking at $1 trillion worth of new money, new investment coming to Texas in the next decade just from the data center boom. And that's the kind of thing that West Texas particularly has not seen since oil and gas was discovered.
So how do we measure that between this economic impact that it could have for West Texas and Texas in general versus some of the questions about responsible land use, responsible water use? How do we make sure that stays balanced?
Well, I think that's something we tried to do last session with Senate Bill 6. It was our first stab. Honestly, 2 years ago, if you said AI to me, I thought we were talking about cows. I didn't know that what this was, and really neither did anybody else. The data center boom happened really hard, really fast. And the whole reason of Senate Bill 6 was data centers can move and build so much quicker than traditional industry does, like oil and gas or an automotive plant, right. Those kind of things. Data centers can suck up all the power really, really fast. When I first became chair of state affairs, PUC and ERCOT estimated that we would need 10 additional gigawatts of power to support this traditional industrial growth and data centers over the next decade. Currently, we have well over 400 gigawatts proposed for new power, and data centers can and will, if they can get the interconnects, consume it all. So now we have a lot of speculators. You have a lot of people that aren't really going to build a data center. There's 400 and some gigawatts proposed, but the truth is about 15% of what's being proposed is ever going to get built out. So I think let's just start with water. Data centers have done a really pretty good job of explaining how they're going to cool the data center. In fact, I met with a group of hyperscalers just a couple weeks ago that were explaining a process to build the microchips that are self-cooling, where they will use no water. But the water question that I think is more important to the people is, data centers can have a closed loop, they can be air cooled, they can have self-cooling microchips, but that power generation they're bringing in to create all these additional gigawatts of power, they haven't answered the question on how are you going to cool the power generation to my satisfaction. I'll have another hearing, I think the 19th of August, on this subject alone. I think that question has to be answered from a local standpoint. And when these data centers come to these small communities and, bring 5,000 to 7,000 workers in, counties need to get ahead of this. Counties need to, if they're going to make that deal, make an abatement deal. And I believe most data center developers are just begging, we'll pay you whatever you want. But our local officials and our state officials, we need to look at what does this do to a small town that has 500 people in it. Now we put 7,000 people in it for 5 years. When those 7,000 people are gone, we've increased everybody's property taxes because we built all this infrastructure to support it. Now there's no population to spread the cost. And over that 5 years, we've increased our sheriff's office, our jail, our EMS, all of those things that will affect our way of life. I think I hear a lot of misinformation about data centers, but the water question and the local government infrastructure after the build is over and they're just computing data, those are the things as a county I think we should be focused on.
We have more from Representative King after the break.
What are the farmers and ranchers and your constituents in those districts? What are some of their concerns as you meet with them about this thing that has found its way into our everyday vernacular and into our lives?
Number one's water. It doesn't matter what county we're in. Which Hemphill County's a little far removed from a 345 junction, so data centers aren't trying to build there. But as you get through the counties, my constituents, their first concern is water. And when we talk about the difference in cooling the data center versus cooling power generation, and once folks start understanding that the amount of water the data center is going to consume is kind of minute compared to a center pivot or a lot of other industry consumption, but our concern needs to be focused on power generation. How are you going to cool that? Nobody wants to answer that question. So, when we have those conversations, and then, I think people, and this is where I'm frustrated with the data center community. So, I've made the point that no one care how many buildings you see going up. I believe about 15% of them ultimately get an interconnect. So the data centers are all petitioning PUC and ERCOT for power. The reason the numbers got so high is because they're all bidding on the same project. They're all bidding for the same thing. And in the oil field, and we call that a tight hole. Nobody wants to talk about the new pocket of gas or oil that got found. Well, so data centers have clammed up. So whoever is saying whatever on Facebook or whatever your choice social media platform is, that's the only narrative out there. So the people that are going to be affected, that's the only story they've heard. They haven't heard the data center folks say, "Hey, that's not right. We're going to do X, Y, Z." And then we have some, just like every industry, there's some bad actors in this. And they need to go to the back of line and never get the power generation. I think data centers as I said earlier, the irony of this is data centers are losing the argument for data centers via data centers. And if the data centers don't show up in our communities and become community partners and answer the questions you're asking me about, okay, what's our town look like in 10 years? What are you going to do for our school? What are you going to do for our hospital? What about our roads that are constantly needing repair? Now you're going to add more traffic. If they don't start answering those questions themselves, then I think data centers are going to have a very hard time next session.
We continue our conversation with Representative King after the break.
Is there going to be a way to be able to track how much water each one of these places, once they're up and running, how much of it they're using, how much power they're pulling, and if any cost, what cost is being passed along to Texans?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a way. I mean, most counties, and I mean, I have a few counties that don't have their own water conservation district. But any county that has a water conservation district, you have to report how much you're using, no matter what your business is. They will not be exempt from that. I think, and power usage, that is a metered function. Everybody will know what they're using. I think there's a way to craft this additional power generation to where it does benefit the folks or the people. And if we're gonna put say we actually built out 48 additional gigawatts in the Texas Panhandle, there ought to be a way that additional power lowers the consumer rate. But currently, really the cost concern on electric generation isn't the generation, it's transmission. The way the law works in Texas is everybody pays a proportionate share of transmission. Well, transmission is what is going to be really, really expensive. But, the governor said, and I said in Senate Bill 6 last time, that's going to change. We need to evaluate that law and make sure the people that are causing the need for, triple the transmission in Texas over the next decade, that they're paying for it, not the consumer. Because when your electric bill goes up, it's not always just the rate. It's the amount of transmission that is a shared cost across commercial and residential across the state.
We wrap up our conversation with Representative King after the break.
I kind of think of it like this. I'm sure way before our time, Andy, there were some people that made buggy whips that were really mad at Henry Ford. But I don't know how you stop it. It is progress. It's coming. I think, as I say, before this really gets kicked off and there's a lot of water usage or anything else, the Texas legislature is going to likely meet at least 3 more times. And every day I learn something new about a data center. And so, maybe after next session, we'll do this again and I'll give you better answers than I gave you today.
No, we can't stop it, but we can regulate it.
That's right. And that's kind of my thinking. If they want to be here that bad, they need to pay for the privilege to operate in Texas.
All right. Well, you have your hands full this next session, don't you?
I do. But I'm looking forward to it. This is a challenge of our time, and State Affairs is a really good committee. It's a big committee, and it has a lot of different bills come to it. Besides all of this, all of the wildfire legislation that we did last session that caused our state to go from, or this area to go from 80 electrical starts in 1 year to 5. All of that happens in State Affairs as well. So, I'm looking forward to continuing the wildfire fight. And with this data center stuff, on the wildfire front, I think anybody that wants to put a battery storage facility in any county in the Panhandle, they need to pay to train that fire department how do you fight a battery fire, because a battery fire is something that completely different than a wildfire or anything else. And our local volunteers, while we did a better job last session funding them, they don't have the training for that. That's just goes back to that abatement issue. think about what you can get out of it and get it all.
Thanks for joining us here on Politics Today. I'm Jack Kessler. Thanks for joining us.